There's an old saying that I've heard from time immemorial. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, meaning that a rule or standard that applies in a situation should apply to everyone equally, regardless of the circumstances. It highlights the need for equitable and fair treatment, where one group is not favored over others, or when an individual wants to have their way without regards for, or at the expense of the other. Well, the president of Mali, Colonel Assimi Goïta, and the president of China, Xi Jinping, just showed the United States government just what that phrase actually means. On August 20th, 2025, the U.S. government imposed a visa bond on Africans traveling to the United States. The bonds were initially imposed on travelers from Malawi and Zambia. A visa bond is a refundable financial guarantee that certain travelers from certain countries must pay before they can enter a country. It's used to ensure that the person traveling complies with the host country's visa conditions and acts as a deterrent against overstaying your time or other visa term and immigration violations. If the traveler leaves within the visa's mandated time frame, the bond will be refunded. If they overstay their visit or violate any visa terms, the bond will be forfeited. In the case of the United States, the usual range of a visa bond ranges from $5,000 to $15,000, depending on the risk assessment of the traveler. Travelers from countries with high visa overstays may be required to post a bond, as is the case with these 10 African countries, allegedly with the highest visa overstay rates. The countries, however, that you don't see on this list is Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. Why then are citizens from these and other countries required to pay between $5,000 and $15,000 to travel to the United States when their respective countries and citizens aren't even on America's travel bond radar? Could it be that America is spiteful and acting on behalf of France and Emmanuel Macron, who keeps seeing his colonies in Africa, the French economy, and his political career slipping through his fingers? Or is it because the U.S. government tried to get 13 African countries to fall back into the clutches of their colonial masters, but these African nations all rejected their offers? Whatever the reason, President Assimi Goïta of the Republic of Mali wasn't having any of it. In October 2025, Mali's foreign ministry announced that U.S. nationals applying for tourist or business visas would be required to post a visa bond upwards to $10,000. In a tit-for-tat game theory move mirroring the U.S.'s visa bond. The tit-for-tat strategy in game theory basically says, if you come to me in a cordial manner, we'll respond and come to you in a cordial manner. But if you come to me retaliatory, then we'll also come to you retaliatory. Tit-for-tat. So, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. In April 2025, President Trump announced sweeping tariffs ranging from 10% to 50% on imports from 180 countries, including nearly all of Africa, due to perceived barriers to U.S. goods. China's Belt and Road Initiative has provided infrastructural investments and strategic partnerships to the Sahel states, but the former colonial powers are trying to keep them divided with conflicts and wars, so there wouldn't be a straight line from Mauritania to Eritrea, which would benefit Africa. Basically, all of Africa is pretty much responding to U.S. tariffs in much the same way, with cautious recalibration, efforts to diversify trade partnerships, regional trade reinforcement, quiet diplomacy, and increased engagement with China and Russia to protect their citizens from rising costs. Speaking of China, President Trump threatened China with 100% tariffs on all imports in response to Beijing's export controls on rare earth minerals.
Well, the S&P 500 turned lower in the final hour of the trade after, you guessed it, a flare-up in the trade war with China. President Trump threatening to stop trade in cooking oil with China in a Truth Social post, a retaliatory move after Beijing is continuing to refuse to buy American soybeans. Joining us now is Balance of Power co-host Joe Matthews. So, Joe, it feels like a little bit we're back in an environment where there's so much headline ping pong when it comes to what is the state of play with trade negotiations with China.
Yeah, it's been kind of a day-to-day up and down here, with the president being accused of pulling another taco over the weekend following his very aggressive post on Truth Social on Friday sent the markets in a tizzy, then the relief rally yesterday, and yes, today. I'm guessing you didn't have cooking oil on the menu for the program, but that's what the president's talking about on Truth Social, and this post helped to send the markets lower.
And how did China respond to this?
Well, let's get the view from China now with Victor Gao, who's the Vice President of the Centre for China and Globalisation. Good morning.
Good morning.
The biggest question for everybody this morning, given the escalation, is what will China do now?
I think the Chinese government has announced that it will launch a mirror image of the tariff against China. And this is very proportional, very measured. It is completely in retaliation against the wrongful sanction tariffs launched by the United States against China. Now, President Trump threatened to further increase 50% of tariff against China, and he demanded China to rescind the announced retaliation. I would say two things. One is that Chinese government will definitely retaliate again if the United States imposes additional 50% tariff against Chinese export. China will announce immediately 50% retaliatory tariff against the U.S. export to China. Now, the second point, which is equally, if not even more important, is that in this round of trade war initiated by the United States, not only against China, but against so many countries in the world, China will not blink first. China will not be the first country to blink vis-a-vis the United States. In China, we have no panic buying of things made in the United States, for example, whereas in the United States, people are panicking. They are buying things from the supermarkets, from the department stores, made in China, made in other countries. Therefore, I hope President Trump and his advisors, some of whom are really very much flawed in terms of character and decency, for example, should realize that tariff will not save the United States. Tariff war against other countries is the wrong thing. Of course, different countries will decide what they need to do in front of such maximum pressure from the United States, but China's view is very clear. Stand up firm and do a tit-for-tat retaliation against the United States. And I hope by the end of the day, President Trump will realize how wrong he has been in using such maximum pressure against China.
And if Donald Trump doesn't realise, as you say, that he's wrong, and he doesn't go back on his tariff decisions, which all indications are at the moment that he won't, is there any way to avoid a global recession as a result?
No, I think from the Chinese perspective, we'll never go to Washington and beg for something. China's position will be very clearly defined. Do whatever the United States is doing to China, and we retaliate against what the United States will do, even at the cost of a total war between China and the United States in terms of tariff war or trade war or otherwise. This is the firm decision of China. China will never cry uncle or go to Washington with its hat in its hand and beg for something. This is not the way China is doing. China is defending its fundamental interest in the right way, and the people in China support it. And I think eventually it will never be China who will blink first. Remember what I say, and let's wait for another day or another week or less than 4 years to come and to see what will happen.
And you're saying that China can sustain through that amount of time. I'm interested there. You said no matter what happens, an economic war, a trade war, or anything else. What do you mean when you refer to any other kind of war? What do you mean by that?
Because the wars launched by the United States against China are already multiple wars. You are talking about the tariff war, the trade war, the technology war, the talent war, the energy war, and the threatened military war of different kinds, including proxy war, etc. I think China is fully prepared to deal with the United States as it is, as friend if they want to be, as a foe if they want to be, in any way, peace or otherwise. And I think this is the message China wants to give to Washington. Why? Because in matters of such importance to global peace and stability.
Those were harsh, but straightforward words. But remember what was said about the tit-for-tat strategy in game theory. If you come to me in a cordial manner, we will respond and come to you in kind. But if you come to me in a retaliatory manner, we will respond in kind. You get what you give. Tit for tat. If Mali, and China for that matter, were to adopt a tit-for-tat strategy in response to U.S. tariffs, i.e., cooperating when the U.S. cooperates and retaliating when the U.S. imposes trade barriers, the predictive outcomes would vary based on their economic leverages, strategic goals, and the duration of the interaction. As it pertains to playing the tit-for-tat game theory in Mali and China's trade negotiations with the U.S., here are the possible variables in play. Round 1. The U.S. imposed tariffs. Mali and China retaliate with tariffs of their own against the U.S. The outcome, the situation escalates. Round 2. The U.S. reduced tariffs. Mali and China reciprocate and reduce theirs as well. The outcome, there are partial recoveries of goods and services, as well as trust and respect. Round 3. The U.S. cooperate and dissolve tariffs. Mali and China respond in kind. The outcome, trade between them stabilize, and the mutually beneficial repercussions are that everyone will gain lower import prices. We're seeing a major defiance from countries like Mali and China as they project their assertiveness while responding to U.S. policies with tit-for-tat measures that underscore a changing geopolitical climate and signaling a broader global shift toward reciprocal diplomacy and resistance to U.S. pressure. As Mali's government announced a retaliatory visa bond requirement for U.S. citizens in response to U.S. visa policies, and as China escalates its economic standoff with the United States following U.S. threats of 100% tariffs on all Chinese imports, other countries are quietly observing. Mali's and China's actions highlight a global resistance as they assert their sovereignty in the face of unilateral U.S. and Western European overreach. Their responses reflect a shared sentiment. The era of unquestioned U.S. and Western European dominance in global affairs is hereby challenged by a more multipolar world order. As the U.S. navigates this resistance, it faces a complex diplomatic landscape where even smaller nations like Mali are no longer passive actors. The message is clear. Reciprocity is the new language of international engagement, tit for tat, and the global balance of power is in flux. Write in the comments if you believe that the era of a unipolar world as we know it is quickly coming to an end. And as always, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching.